Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we are going to share Goatman horror stories. First story. I believe in Goatman. Goatman lives. I know it. I remember the first time I heard a story about him. I didn't believe it. Ghosts I believed in. Spirits, sure. But a half-man, half-goat creature that wandered the woods and terrorized people? This was too much, even for my fertile imagination. My grandfather grew up in northern Ontario, where his family worked in the mining industry. He was the first one who ever told me about Goatman. One bitterly cold winter, when he was just a boy, a huge snowstorm blew through the area. He remembered, at dinner time, his father talking about how, when he was making his way home after gathering some firewood in the woods, he saw in the distance the figure of a man walking through the forest, bent against the wind and snow. He had called to him, but received no answer. Everyone thought it was a wandering vagrant, or someone who had gotten lost as the storm blew up and was searching for shelter. That night, though, Grandpa said that his family had woken up and seen what looked like a man walking around the house, looking in the windows. Come morning, they went to check it out. Instead of fresh human boot or shoe prints in the snow, they saw cloven hoof prints. And that's where the story ended. His story, anyway. Mine had yet to begin. My grandparents had moved a couple of hours away from that area, and I grew up living next door to them in a gold mining town. I'm an only child, but my best friend was my cousin, Tanya. She lived in the same town. We'd spend every summer in the woods around my grandparents and my house. Those woods had a magical quality to them. They felt extremely safe and wholesome, like the 100-acre wood from Winnie the Pooh or something. We'd play for hours in those woods, pretending we were Celtic princesses or pioneer women. But one day, we wandered a little too far. This was northern Ontario, so our entire town was surrounded by bush and rock, being part of the Canadian Shield. Not far beyond the safe, happy-feeling woods behind my grandparents' house was the lake the town had taken its name from. When I was little, it was a beautiful spot, but the mine had drained it due to some exploration. A chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, and our parents had always warned us not to go near there. It could be really dangerous. Tanya was a show-off. At 16 years old, she was only 1 year ahead of me, but boy did she lord over me. She was petite with graceful curves, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a flawless complexion. Boys fawned over her. I, on the other hand, was an awkward 15-year-old with thick, long brown hair, glasses, braces, and an acne problem. She was sweet and always told me I was pretty and helped me to feel better about myself. But she made no secret that she thought she was drop-dead gorgeous. And she was right. Tanya was also a lot more worldly than me. I was bookish, naive, and didn't have experience with boys. She'd already had several boyfriends and had tried smoking and drinking, two things I refused to do. So, it didn't surprise me when she said we should travel down to the fence that bordered the drained-out lake and flash the few guys who would be sitting in their diggers, I don't know the right word for the equipment they used, that were working there. EW10, no. I said, they're like 40 years old, probably. So what? I like older men, she said, and started off through the dense forest towards the lake. Yeah. I'm sure you do, I said, rolling my eyes. I sure as hell wasn't going to be flashing my barely developed breasts at some random older guys, but I wasn't going to let Tanya claim to be the daring and brave one and go on her own, either. I've always been sensitive, but I was shocked that Tanya couldn't feel the palpable change in atmosphere when we left the higher ground of the woods that were closer to my grandparents' house to scramble down some of the rocky forest that ran down closer to the lake. I thought maybe it was a change in altitude at the time, but the woods suddenly seemed quieter, stuffier, and danker. Tanya was rambling on about her latest conquest, Jordan, a boy from grade 12, when we finally came in a view of the lake behind the fence. She stopped in her tracks and looked back at me with a disgusted look on her face. EW, what the hell is that smell? She asked me, her pert nose wrinkling. It smells like ass. Ugh, I don't know, I replied. My nostrils were being assaulted by a smell I had never experienced before something pungent and animalistic and wrong. Maybe there's some kind of bear cave or wolf den nearby, I added. Maybe it's coming off of the lake, she said, and we moved closer to the fence to look through. My grandparents had this large, two-story brick house right at the edge of town. The house was on a hill, so that walking in the front door, the main floor was flush with the ground, but when you walked out French doors that led off of the breakfast room onto the deck outside, you were a good story up off the ground. And from that vantage point, you could see the drained-out lake surrounded by forest. Usually, there were 1 or 2 bulldozers working there at any given time of the day. But today, there was nothing. No bulldozers, no workers. That's odd, I said. Where are the workers? Even the bulldozers are gone. What day is it? I asked Tanya, thinking maybe it was a holiday or something and the guys didn't have to work. It's Monday, she said, raising her eyebrows. Who knows, though? Maybe the bulldozers had to be serviced. Let's walk around some more, now that we're here. The smell was still there, and we were by no means getting used to it, but our sense of adventure won out over our sense of disgust at the musky, foreign aroma. We walked in silence around the fence line, and every twig that snapped underneath our feet sounded super loud, echoing out across the empty expanse of what used to be a crystal-clear lake. We couldn't hear any birds or other animals scurrying around in the forest, but neither of us said anything because before we had a chance to, we were confronted by something deeply unsettling. What the hell is that? I asked as we turned a bend. It looked like a huge, wrenching hole had been torn into the fence, which was splayed open. Why is there a hole in the fence? Probably teenagers coming apart here, Tanya mumbled, but I could tell she felt scared. We walked to the hole in the fence and were hit with the same scent that had been lingering around us like a ton of bricks. Tanya gagged and hunched over, trying not to vomit. I must have had a stronger stomach. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and went to look more closely at the fence. We got to get out of here, I said, seeing dark, wiry fur stuck in some of the broken fence. I think a bear or something has been here. I didn't hear anything from Tanya, but I was too busy looking at the fence. My heart dropped as I saw a streak of blood in the mud just inside the empty lake. No, not a streak, a trail of blood. I don't know what came over me, but I knew I had to follow that trail. I looked back, and Tanya was sitting, pale-faced with her arms wrapped around her on a fallen log by the fence. There's blood on the ground, I said, my voice echoing nervously on the lake. Blood on the ground, she mumbled in a strange, monotone voice. What the hell? Yes, genius, and I'm going to figure out where it came from, see if anyone is hurt. I snapped back. Tanya was a notorious girly girl, and I figured she was in shock from seeing it, too. Stay there, and if I'm not back in a few minutes, go for help. Help, she said, tilting her head and looking at me with blank eyes. I shuddered, but turned to follow the trail. I had only walked a few paces into the drained-out lake when the going got pretty rough. It dipped down pretty steeply from where I had entered the fence through the hole that was torn into it, and about 20 yards off, I could see one of the bulldozers that was usually busy working flipped over onto its side. The trail of blood I was following got more saturated. Instead of streaks here and there were puddles. My stomach was churning. I had stopped in my tracks, about 10 meters from the bulldozer, when I saw a man's boot sitting in a puddle of blood. I suddenly realized that I was a 15-year-old girl who was all of 5'3" and weighed 110 pounds, completely unarmed and incapable of defending herself against whatever had left all that blood. Suddenly, I felt panicked. I decided it must have been a sick bear or wolf who had picked off one of the workers. I remember my parents telling me that wolves and bears will usually leave you alone and that only the sick ones ever go after humans. I turned and ran up the embankment and to the opening in the fence. But Tanya was gone. Tanya, I called out, not too loudly, for fear that whatever crazed, rabid animal that was out there would hear me and find me. Where are you? Stop screwing around. I searched the area for her, but there was no sign of her. The sun was starting to set. I figured that she got tired of waiting for me and freaked herself out and headed home without me. I was almost as mad at the thought of that as I was scared. But then I noticed something. The smell was gone. The smell from before, that horrible, acrid smell, was completely gone. The wind hadn't changed, nothing had. But the woods now smelled like woods. And there was birdsong. Weird. I walked as quickly as I could back to my grandparents' house, and when I went in, everyone was sitting down to dinner, including Tanya. I quickly washed up and joined them at the table. You'll never believe what Tanya and I found out in the woods, I said. Around the table sat my grandparents, my mom and dad, and Tanya's dad. And Tanya, who was looking at me wide eyes and her head tilted oddly to the side. You were in the woods? Grandma said, as she spooned some boiled potatoes onto my plate. I hope you didn't go too far. That's the thing, I said, looking at my parents and then hastily away. We want to look through the fence at the lake. What? My father demanded, his face like thunder. That's so dangerous. There are sinkholes all over that place. I know, I'm sorry, but you need to listen. I replied. No need to listen, Tanya mumbled. What? I said, turning to look at her. She smiled wanly at me, got up from the table, and left the room. Just what is going on? Tanya's dad demanded, glaring at me. The adults seated around the table were all looking at me with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. I burst into tears. Something terrible happened down there, I said, and my mother came to put her arms around me. Hysterically, I told them about how we found a hole in the fence, and how I had seen blood in the mud, and a man's boot, and a tipped-over bulldozer. And then my mother ushered me from the room as my grandfather picked up the phone to call the police. We didn't finish having dinner there. My parents and I drove home, and I went to bed early. I was shaken from the day and entirely exhausted. They told me the police may want to talk to me in the morning, but not to worry about it. I knew they were too scared about what had happened to lecture me. The next day, my grandparents came over and told me that the police had searched the grounds and had found the hole in the fence, but nothing else. There was no blood to be found, no boot, no bulldozer. They had asked me if my imagination had gotten away with me, and I swore that it didn't. But I saw the concern in their eyes as they looked at themselves and me and back to each other. I stopped talking about it, and they stopped asking. Later that day, Tanya came over. My parents had let her in, and she flounced into my room and flopped on my bed. She punched my arm and said, "Why the hell did you leave me on my own in the woods yesterday?" "What? You left me," I said, looking at her confusedly. "When I got back, you were gone. I wasn't even 5 minutes." "No, I sat there waiting for you," she said, her eyebrows raised. "I waited until after dark, and you didn't come out. Then I went back to Grandma and Grandpa's. They said that you'd left with your parents. You're shitting me, and I don't like it. I've already been through enough." I snapped at her, feeling sick to my stomach. "I'm not shitting you. I swear," she said, sounding scared. "Something weird is going on. Last night, when I got back, Grandma and Grandpa and Dad seemed upset. I figured they were mad at me for being gone so long, so I apologized. Dad said to relax, and that I'd only been away from the table for 10 minutes. Then he told me about how they'd called the police and how your parents had taken you home. What is going on? I felt like someone had thrown ice water over me. Tanya, you had dinner with us last night. You were at the house when I got back. It wasn't dark yet. We sat there in silence. We couldn't figure out. Tanya asked if she could sleep over, and our parents agreed. We watched Friends reruns on my TV until we fell asleep in my double bed. It was the smell that woke me up. That same horrible, metallic, musky smell, like sweat and wet dog and blood and smoke all in one. And then I heard it. A tap, tap, tap on my window. I sat slowly up in bed, reached for my glasses on the bedside table, and put them on. Outside my house, looking in my window, was Tanya. She had a wide smile on her face, her head was tilted to the side, and every couple of seconds, she was vibrating. I looked down beside me in the bed, and there was Tanya, fast asleep. By the time I had shaken her awake, it was gone. We turned the TV back on and watched game shows until the morning light streamed through my window. I went to look outside my bedroom, which was at the front of the house, above my mother's rose garden. There, in the damp soil, I saw hoof prints. Second story. Something whispers my name in the woods. It used to happen now and again. I first remember hearing it when I was just a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. I've been on a stroll through the woods with my mom and her boyfriend, cutting through the park to get to an ice cream shop on the other side of town. Freddie, the voice said, quietly like a whisper. At the time, I thought it was just my mom's boyfriend, now ex, playing a prank on me. What? I asked him. He shrugged, didn't say anything. The second time it happened, I was 10 years old. My school wasn't far from the forest, and occasionally we'd do our physical education classes out there. This particular time, we were playing capture the flag. I was the flag keeper and exhausted from running, so I found a small spot away from the action to catch my breath. The flag was stuck into my belt on my waist, so I couldn't just grab a breath anywhere. It was easy to steal if somebody was quick or quiet enough. It just so happened one kid, Ryan, thought he was that quiet. Honestly, I wouldn't have heard him either. He was nearly on top of me. Freddie. I jumped at the sound of my name, and Ryan lunged for my flag. Before he could reach me, though, I bolted. At the time, I thought that maybe Ryan called my name to rub in his impending victory. Like a "Ha, Freddie, got ya," sort of thing. As time wore on, I learned that wasn't the case. The voice called out to me more frequently. When I was in high school, I got a job at a movie theater on the other end of town. The quickest route to get there was, you guessed it, to cut through the forest path. I walked it alone, and often. The more I did, the more the voice would whisper my name. Soon, it was whispering my name at least once every time I walked through the woods. Freddie, it would say, and I'd stop and look around. When I wouldn't see anybody, I'd turn and continue on my way. This might sound a little silly, but I sort of got used to it. I guess maybe I just didn't want to think I was losing my mind, so I never told anybody about it. Being the kid that heard voices wasn't exactly a badge of honor in high school. Plus, I like to think that maybe I just had some kind of special connection with the woods. Like some spiritual hippie thing. I was 17 years old when the voice terrified me. I'd been leaving a late shift at the theater, one much later than I'd ever done before, and had an exam I still needed to study for the next morning. As much as I didn't want to cut through the woods after dark, I didn't have the money for a cab and the buses had stopped running. So I went through the forest. I'd walked the path 1,000 times before. Why should tonight be any different? It was quiet at first. Only the wind and the swaying trees greeted my ears. Now and again I would hear something moving in the brush, but it was always easy enough to dismiss as a squirrel or raccoon. After all, I was in their territory. They were probably surprised by me. My heart jumped at the sound of my name. Freddie, the voice said. Jesus. I snapped, not expecting it in the dark. I took a deep breath and told myself to relax. It's just you, I mumbled to myself with a chuckle. I walked for a few more minutes when I picked up on the faint sound of footsteps behind me. Was somebody else taking the shortcut? I turned around, peering into the inky dark of the forest trail. While the moonlight was enough to make out the path directly ahead, it was tough to see much further than 10 or 15 feet. I pulled out my phone and turned on the light, casting it over the trail. Nothing. Just wood chips and a stray candy wrapper. I pocketed my phone, pulled my jacket tighter around me, and continued on. This time I picked up my pace, moving at a fast walk. Freddie, the voice said again, this time less airy and more forceful. I ignored it, continuing on my way. I just wanted to get the hell out of those woods. It's hard to explain, but I'm sure you've felt the same impulse now and again. The sensation that you aren't safe. I felt it in my gut. My body was telling me to leave as quickly as possible. The voice repeated my name, its tone shifting lower, then higher. It sounded unhinged, like an out-of-tune instrument. I'd never heard it repeat my name so often in such a short span of time. Freddie, it sang. Freddie, Freddie, Freddie. I broke into a run. Freddie, it screamed, and footsteps thundered behind me. My mind went blank, my body acting on its own. I ran as hard and as fast I could. The voice screamed my name over and over again, its footsteps closing in on me. I shouted for help, my voice cracking. "Freddie!" It shrieked from right behind me. I pulled my phone out and frantically dialed 911. I wasn't sure any longer that I could outrun this thing, whatever it was. I needed help, desperately. The phone beeped, and I heard somebody answer on the other end. 911, what is your emergency? Something grabbed my shoulder. I screamed and whipped my hand around, connecting with nothing but air, but managing to lose my phone in the process. "Leave me alone," I screamed, throwing everything I had into my sprint. My lungs felt like they were on fire, but I knew the alternative of stopping would be far worse. I heaved breath after painful breath. Tears streamed down my face, and my legs burned with exhaustion. I was going to die. I knew it. Then I burst out of the woods. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I didn't stop to look behind me. I kept running until I reached the nearest neighborhood a couple blocks away. That night, I took the long way home, sticking to the best lit streets and only those lined with homes. The voice, whatever it was, didn't follow me beyond the tree line. I'm home now, breathless and still trying to calm down. My mom's not here. She's still at her late shift at the hospital, but I'll tell her everything when she gets back. In the meantime, I contacted the police, and they're searching the forest. I don't know what it was that was whispering my name for all these years, but I know one thing. I'm never going back into those woods again. Shit. 1 second. I'm pretty sure I just heard the back door open. All right, looks like I'll have to leave this here for now. I just heard my mom call my name from downstairs. She must be home early. Third story. Goatman. This happened 2 Fridays before NY. I was at home with my friend, Samantha, a few hours after school ended, when my dad called me to let me know that he wasn't going to come home that night. There was going to be a really shitty storm, and said he'd rather stay at a friend's house with a few coworkers than drive 2 hours. My dad is a construction worker. He works at different locations for every new project. This one was far. My mom came home not too long after, drenched in rain. She talked to Sam for a bit before telling us she'd be upstairs taking a shower and filling out some paperwork from the office. Shit was thrown into the air at around 8 p.m. when Sam and I heard knocking on the door. It was already weird because who is even out in this weather? It was pouring rain and the streets looked like an actual stream of piss. I went down to the door, dragging Sam with me, only to be greeted by nothing. We were looking out the door for a little under 5 seconds when we heard knocking again. Now this is when the shit that was thrown into the air reached and hit the fan. Sam and I instantly pissed ourselves when we realized someone was knocking on my back door being the door leading to the backyard. We quietly went up the stairs to my mom's room, finding her asleep, not even changed out of her work clothes. I woke her up immediately and told her someone was in our backyard. This obviously caused alarm, and seeing her so freaked out freaked Sam and I out even more. This might not sound as scary to you, but being home without my dad in the house was scary enough on its own. Mom went down into the kitchen, with us trailing not even 2 feet behind her, and she pulled out her rolling pin. Before we could reach the door, the knocking stopped. Mom reached over and pulled the curtain back. All Sammy and Mom saw was pitch black, but I swear I saw someone standing a few feet away from the door. Maybe it was because I was the only one of us facing its direction, but it was tall, like 7 feet and maybe over. That's all I could tell you because that's all I saw of it. It was probably just one of the tree branches. It's really windy out, too, Mom suggested. I could tell Sammy wasn't too sure, and I knew damn well it wasn't a tree branch, but why freak the rest of them out? I know now I should have told them so we could have left, but I kept quiet for their sake. About an hour after that, Mom decided to go to the department store down the street to pick up some dinner and left both of us at home. It was only 5 minutes later when we heard knocking again. I quickly felt uneasy. It could be your mom. I went down to the door and asked who it was. The following 5 seconds of silence were the longest 5 seconds of my life. It's me. It was Mom, but at the same time I felt like it wasn't. Looking back now, I realize her voice sounded like it was lacking all human characteristics. It wasn't playful, nor was it frustrated at how long we were keeping her in the rain. It sounded like she didn't even know what emotions were. I opened the door without unlocking the chain and was greeted by my mom, Sam, and I let her in, and she came without any bags. She sat down on the couch for a few minutes, looking around. She was so messed up. She seemed glitchy, like her actions weren't flowing smoothly. "Mom, are you okay? You don't seem right." Her eyes looked at me before the rest of her face turned. It was just a long walk. Cold outside. Raining. She kept listing words and phrases that made little sense. I was getting more uneasy by the second, but I think Sam was just glad we weren't home alone anymore. The scariest thing that happened that night happened during one of Mom's rambling. Sammy had asked her what we were having for dinner, and she started listing more foods that we didn't even have. Halfway through her rant, I received a text from Mom. "Do you girls want lasagna? Ask Sammy what she wants. Take your time deciding. It's so warm in here. X." My heart instantly dropped. Mom was right in front of me, talking about fish fingers. Sam and whatever was pretending to be. Mom directed their attention to me. I was panting, and according to Sam, all color had drained from my face. "Who is it?" Mom asked. "Wrong number." I quickly flashed a smile. "You look tired, Mom. Do you want to go to bed? Sam and I will make dinner. I think I just need a bath." We nodded, and she stood up and made her way to the stairs. She was at the bottom of the stairs when I pulled out my phone to take a photo. I looked down at it for 1 second to cancel the 20% remaining notification, but when I looked back up, Mom was already at the top step. I can't stress this enough. The time in which I looked at my phone and looked back up was impossible for someone to walk 13 steps. I ran back to Sammy and waited until we both heard the water in the bathroom running. "Sam, my mom texted me." "What?" When that thing was talking to us, my mom texted me. She started freaking out and thinking for reasons. Maybe she meant to send the text earlier, but it only delivered now. It seemed valid. Apple is always glitchy like that. But we decided to call her anyway, just to make sure. Just as the phone started ringing, someone knocked on the door. We went to see who it was. Sammy was about to open it, but I put my hand in front of her. I was so terrified at this point that I was in tears. Sammy stared at me in confusion. "Hey, Mom," I said into the phone. I was shaking, and as soon as Sammy heard me say that, she looked like she was about to throw up. "Open the door. It's freezing outside." I sighed in relief and threw door open. Mom was standing there with the phone pressed to her ear and her shopping bags around her feet. We quickly explained what was happening, and it took my mom 2 minutes of hearing the story for her to climb up the stairs and walk towards the bathroom. She literally kicked the door open and found the tub almost filled to the rim. The window was also open and the fly screen was torn. The rest of the night consisted of us trying to get over what happened. We ended up sleeping together in my mom's room, and my dad came home early next morning. I only started researching a few days ago, and I found out it was the Goatman. Fourth story, the Goatman peering through my window. After what happened to me all those years ago, the one place in the entire world that rattles my body and sends chills up my spine happens to be my grandmother's farm. When my parents and I visited my grandma's one-story cottage every 3 years, I was put in the same room. The room and all its velvet blankets and puffy pillows had a cozy vibe to it, along with the rest of the house. But at nighttime, the large window in front of the bed painted a picture of the unsettling wilderness outside, which didn't soothe my vibrant imagination. And ever since I was 6, my brain terrified me with that imagination, using vivid nightmares, night terrors, sleep paralysis hallucinations, and everything in between. So naturally, my fear of the window was warranted. Most kids have monsters under their beds or in their closets, but at my grandma's house, my boogeyman lurked outside that window. The first time I ever saw it was at 2 o'clock in the morning, and my rapid hyperventilation was the only thing stopping me from squealing in panic. The creature, which I assumed was a figment of my imagination, was at the edge of the woods staring at the window. It was a goat standing on 2 legs, its body shape a furry caricature of a human's, and its claws dangling around its thighs. I slammed my eyes shut and shielded me with my soft blanket, waiting for the thing to evaporate from my imagination. As you can guess, I was dog-tired by the time I woke up. That morning, while my parents were at the town's Walmart and I was trying to forget last night's experience, I had a pleasant and light-hearted conversation with Grandma. We loved to talk, and we had a special type of chemistry that transcended our generational differences. Curious about her farm, I wanted to know about all her animals. "Well, we have all sorts of animals," she said with a toothy grin. "I have chickens, peacocks, pheasants, mules, sheep, hogs, ducks, horses, ponies, bantams. I'll allow any animal on this farm besides goats." "Goats?" I asked, recalling the form outside my window. "Why don't you like goats? I mean, can't you milk them and make cheese?" Grandma's face darkened, and she stroked her fingers through her gray hair as her eyes stared into space. "Well, according to some people, after God created sheep, Satan, in an effort to desecrate God's sheep, created goats, an imperfect species. God, wrathful after Satan disgraced his sheep, created wolves to eat goats. In a massive tantrum of rage, the devil bit the tails off the goats, marking them as an unholy species. With a quizzical and hard-to-decipher face, she said, "I thought you would have seen it by now, haven't you?" I knew what she was talking about in an instant, and it seemed I would burst into a fit of scared shrieking and crying at the thought of my grandmother confirming the thing outside my window was real. I tried to rationalize the situation, thinking the goat-like creature was just a dream and that what my grandma said was unrelated. But the sight of my distress, my grandmother destroyed that idea with the opening of her mouth. "It won't hurt you if you stay inside at night. There's nothing to worry about." It was supposed to be a comforting statement, but a double confirmation of one of my mythical boogeymen not being mythical shuddered me. Grandma pretended to forget the conversation, never speaking of it for the rest of the trip. That night, I decided to sleep in my parents' room, with a bed faced away from the window, but I swear I heard a glassy tapping from behind me. Luckily for my sanity, my parents and I left the farm the next day, leaving behind the rural forests and fields of Maryland. But 3 years after the initial incident, after blocking the creature from my memory, I saw it a second time at 11 o'clock at night. I'd been snoozing on Grandma's couch to the sound of the TV when a reporter shouting, "Breaking news!" jolted me awake. My eyes initially darting around the room and my brain adjusting to consciousness. I gaped at the creature hunched over in front of the living room window. The half-goat sprang from the window and ran into the distance on its 2 legs. I slapped myself, saying, "Snap out of it, snap out of it." But nothing could stop the memories of the creature and what Grandma said about it from hurtling out of the darkest pit of my mind. I paced around the room with adrenaline flooding my arteries, wanting to flee but not knowing where to go. With a few sleeping pills, however, I willed myself to sleep with the living room curtains drawn. The morning after, I found a note on the kitchen table. My parents were shopping, and Grandma was at a doctor's appointment. I was alone in the house, and with undaunted intent to find out what was going on, I plugged in my grandmother's outdated Macintosh for a bit of research. "Half goat, half man," I typed, which brought up a Wikipedia page on satyrs and fawns. Not exactly what I was looking for. "Goat creature in Maryland," I corrected. And as soon as I searched that, Google presented me with another Wikipedia page, this one on a creature known as the Goatman of Maryland. This was precisely what I was looking for, and I proceed to peruse the page. The Goatman of Maryland is a legendary half-goat, half-human creature that has the head and hindquarters of a goat and the body of a human. The page went on to explain how local Marylanders suspect the Goatman is either a failed gene-mixing science experiment or a demonic spawn of Satan, as Grandma insinuated. Getting worked up in the midst of my research, I had 2 primary suspects as to who created the creature. The Henry A. Wallace Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, which wasn't far from the farm, and the Satanic Temple, which had a goat person called the Baphomet as its symbol. However, I had to rule out both of these candidates since the Beltsville Research Center never did any genetic experiments on goats, and the Satanic Temple was an atheist organization that didn't believe in Satan. This left me to continue wondering what the hell this thing was. For the rest of the week, I saw it every single night. While I tried to fall asleep in my room, it would be staggering around the clearing outside my window. If I were watching TV late at night, the Goatman would be gazing at the screen from the living room window. And on the last day, when I was feeding Grandma's peacocks in the evening, she came to bring me inside after she saw it approaching the farm. By the end of the second visit, seeing the Goatman was a usual occurrence, and with the occasional reminder from Grandma, I respected it and its personal space. 3 years later, however, my third visit to Grandma's ranch showed me what happened when you didn't honor the Goatman's boundaries. On the local news, there was one headline stirring up the rustic community. 10 professional boar hunters killed in animal attack. My parents thought it was horrible, but Grandma and I shot each other looks of shared knowledge. The next morning, the paper arrived at the farm, where the hunting tragedy made the front page. Yesterday evening, police found 10 renowned hunters, mutilated to death by a wild animal. The hunters' AR-15 magazines were completely full upon death, and local authorities are stumped as to how none of them could have gotten a shot off. My parents, who had no knowledge of the Goatman, had no idea what caused the attack and were as ignorant as the confounded investigators. So I had to ask Grandma why my parents hadn't seen it yet. Well, she said, the creature only appears to those who interest it. It's apathetic towards some, including your parents. Empathetic towards others, like it is with us. But it also shows antipathy towards particular people, such as those hunters who didn't respect its turf. You have to understand it can change its views on people. I have scars from when I was a girl, but after it got used to me, it stopped. My parents, who were your great-grandparents, were demoted to the low end of the thing's opinions. Their passing and my survival go to show how unpredictable it can be. I was shaking and, shall I say, more than freaked out by that. The thing had attacked Grandma when she was young, and it seemed like the Goatman could change its opinion of me in the blink of the eye. For all I knew, it swapped its views of people like a teenage girl changes clothes. It had seemed like I'd developed an affinity with the creature during my last visit by seeing it all the time and watching TV with it. And not once did I go outside in the night when it was in charge of the farm. I'd respected it. Could it really forget all that? Or was I reading into Grandma's statements more than I should have? In the visits following that year, I read news articles about mutilated hikers, missing campers, and farm animals turning up dead. The Goatman was getting more aggressive. One time, the creature looked right into my soul with its black, empty eyes, and for the first time since my initial viewing of it, my body succumbed to unimaginable dread. The more violent the news stories became, the more my relationship with it deteriorated. And I could sense the same happening to Grandma. She was buying up more curtains for the house, acquired a better lock for the door, and went to a shooting range to learn how to use a shotgun. It came to the point where I tried to appease the creature by leaving pig food in the field for it to eat, but instead, it snatched one of the hogs from the pig pen and ran into the woods. On the last day of that visit, I woke up to the sound of ear-splitting banging on the front door. Grandma was gripping her new shotgun, and with my dad holding a baseball bat, they waited for the intruder to burst through the door. Yet the banging subsided after a few minutes, the chirping and croaking of crickets and frogs replacing it within the hour. After that incident, we didn't visit the ranch for 5 years, and I was nearing the end of high school by then. My parents encouraged Grandma to move out of her house in light of people in her town being discovered murdered in their own homes. But being the stubborn Marylander she was, she decided against it. Besides, she thought she knew how fortified her cottage was. A few weeks ago, we returned to that awful farm, finding barbed wire strewn about the outskirts of the field. There were fewer animals there than there was half a decade ago, and I swear some of the surviving pigs had faded scars on their bodies from scratches, stabs, and bites not even the most vicious bear could manage. I was more jittery than I'd ever been in my life, and that's not a hyperbole. I was jumpier than when I took the SAT, 10 times more jittery than when I asked my crush to prom, and feeling like a soldier going to war on a foreign continent. And it was all because I knew that Goatman was scheming someone in the deep woods sensing my arrival on its territory. I spoke with Grandma, who showed me a newspaper talking about how the FBI was getting involved in the murder investigations in rural Maryland and that the perpetrator would be behind bars soon. However, as Grandma told me, other farmers around town were speaking about how the FBI's true motive was to cover up the real culprit. I poked at my food during dinner, ignoring the discourse my family was having. Afterwards, I sauntered to my room and made sure the door was shut before I hopped into bed and waited. After hours of anticipating, in the field beyond my window, the monster dragged the bloodied body of a peaceful doe into view. The Goatman ripped the deer's intestines out and gnawed at its insides with its death-loving fangs, spilling blood onto the moonlit ground. It turned its head to face my direction, hurling a piece of deer at the window. I jerked as blood splattered against the pane like a sheet of rain, startling me to full awareness. Me rushing from my bed to get a closer look at the field, I saw the Goatman had left behind the deer corpse. It was mocking me, and I was sure of it. I settled back to bed with the blood sliding down the window, wrapping myself in my blanket as if it was armor and preparing for whatever might happen next. I have no idea how, but I drifted asleep with a piece of the creature's latest meal stuck to my window. That was when I had the worst nightmare any human mind could produce. It was a once-in-a-lifetime dream of horror where the creature had crept in my room and was slicing chunks of muscle from my limbs and carving blocks of my flesh out of my torso with its claws, chocking me with its horns. The pain was real, and I smelled the rotten stench of the creature's dirt-matted fur. It was as if my mind was nagging at me and screaming at the top of its lungs for me to wake up, so I did. Soaked in sweat, I sent my eyes flying open, gasping like I drowned in near death. As I scrambled to see any sign of the Goatman's presence outside, I panicked upon seeing several inconsistencies with how the room was when I went to sleep. The door was wide open, and something had smeared deer blood on the inside of the window. And that's when the monotonous tapping reached my ears, not from the window, but from my bed frame. Two furry hands slumped over the frame, claws dripping blood onto the sheets. I froze, the form getting to its feet and tilting its head as it examined me. Too weak to fight and too shocked to run, I waited to die. But to my surprise, instead of slashing my belly, the Goatman spoke. "You be not ripe," it said before crouching on all fours and scurrying out of the house. When the police arrived, they found the lifeless body of Grandma, who had died of a heart attack. After that, the FBI showed up, erasing all evidence of forced entry and the strange incidents of deer blood being inside the house. My sobbing and traumatized parents took us to a hotel, and I rejoiced at the fact our room was on the third floor. I shed a few tears and had a good rest, the thought of what the creature had said zipping through my mind. That was 2 weeks ago, and until now, I believed I would never have to see that farm for the rest of my life. But as it turns out, my grandmother had left the farm to me. Not only that, she explicitly stated in her will that I should also inherit her shotgun. I don't want to go back there, but since she died, I feel a weighty guilt dragging me down. My heart desires for me to follow her last wishes, and they involve going back to Maryland with her gun. I'll try getting a priest to bless the farm or an American Indian elder to perform a smudging ritual, although I'm skeptical about those ideas working. I don't know when I'll have to return. I just know it has to be soon. Or else, plenty others will die. Fifth story. I met Goatman in the woods last night. I love hiking. I love walking into the trees, getting further and further from civilization. The sounds of industry grow dimmer and dimmer. The sounds of nature take over. But that was before last night. Before last night, I thought I knew what was in the forest. I was sure that the most dangerous thing was a hungry bear or a twisted ankle miles from help. I may have been a fragile female, as my father liked to claim, but I was tough. I had more than enough knowledge and experience of basic survival. But meeting monsters, meeting Goatman, I expected none of that when I waltzed into the woods for what I figured was a routine overnight trip. I'd done it many times before, rolled into the parking lot of the Appalachian Trail at 8 a.m., armed with a small tent and the backpack it was attached to. My backpack was packed with food, water, a flashlight, a change of clothes, a first aid kit, a lighter. I was prepared. I thought I was prepared. It's always after I've gotten out of my Subaru and moved to the hatchback of it that I take in any others in the lot. A couple and their dog were making their way into the forest. Another car was already locked and left, and a pair of men, big guys wearing camo. They were hanging out by the tailgate of a truck, beers in hand. I turned away as one of them seemed to notice me looking. I could feel their eyes on me, though I ignored it. I glanced at them only briefly. They had fishing poles. Why do you need camouflage for fishing? I had thought to myself. I was focused on getting my gear out, so I didn't notice at first when one of them walked closer. His foot finally landed on a branch, that telltale crunch alerting me to his presence. He reeked, a mixture of cheap beer, sweat, and grease. He was smiling a gaped, toothed grin. His beard was ragged. When he spoke, the stench grew. Better be careful out there, darling. These woods get dark at night. His eyes trailed over me. I puked a little in my mouth. Thanks. I forced a grin, but I think I'll be fine. I finished putting my backpack on with a pointed clip of the chest strap. He grinned wider, though he took the hint and stepped back. I closed the hatch and moved past him, not bothering to fake politeness any longer, keeping my eyes ahead of me. I pressed lock on my key fob and dropped the keys into one of my cargo pants pockets. The man and his friend were chuckling as I made my way across the bridge toward where the trailhead split. The sound made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I felt watched long after I turned the corner out of sight, following the creek down into the valley between the mountains. I should have left, shouldn't have ignored the way my instincts were screaming. Fortunately, I was good at ignoring things by pushing them to the back of my mind. I knew it was all but forgotten. The silence was strong, only broken by the occasional cry of a bird or the gentle rustle of leaves as a squirrel hopped by. It was a deep sort of silence that only the white noise of the breeze blowing through the trees could achieve. That's why I hiked. I could let it all go, focus on nothing but my footsteps, my breathing, the quiet murmur of the river. I stopped for a granola bar at what was probably an hour past last time I looked. I wasn't concerned with time at the time, so I can't say for sure. I sat on a rock a little off the path. It overlooked a small pond, where the water pooled before spilling down along the river. It was then, amidst the bubbling of the brook and the crinkling of my wrapper, that I first heard it. It made me pause. I think I stopped mid-chew. It didn't fit in at all with the forest sounds I was accustomed to. It was wrong. It took a couple seconds before it registered as words, sounding as if they were being said through auto-tune or Google Translate, like there was a filter of hesitation or misunderstanding. Wrong. Way. This. Let's. That. Garbled. Inconsistent. Like catching every other word of the sentence without the proper pause or context needed for the missing words. Look. Trail. Way. I was frozen completely and utterly. I think I stopped breathing. The footsteps came next, with no pace or rhythm to them. I was reminded of my 11th birthday when we went horseback riding. It wasn't a clip-clop, but it was close enough that my mind conjured up images of the Jersey Devil stamping its way through the woods, though the Pine Barrens are about 100 miles south. A breeze blew by, and with it came the stench. Rotting meat, like when I'd found that dead cat under our back porch. Maggots writhing as they gorged on the dead flesh. I gagged and had to clamp a hand over my mouth to stop from retching. My eyes watered, mostly from the smell, but maybe a tiny bit because fear had taken hold of me. My heart beat like a drum in my chest as those footsteps got closer and closer. I pressed myself to the tree blocking me from sight of the path. It felt like an eternity before it was passing behind me. I could hear its wheezing breath, deep and labored, as it lumbered down the trail. And then was gone around a bend, crooning something about look, leaves, trail. I sat on that rock, not daring to move for minutes after. I was at war inside my mind, trying desperately to convince myself that I'd imagined it or that it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it was a confused old man lost in the woods. Maybe a dying deer was downstream somewhere. That explained the smell. But I pushed it to the back of my mind, shaking my head. If I don't think about it, then it doesn't worry me. I pushed myself to my feet, swaying slightly. I looked at the half-eaten bar in my hands, my stomach rolling at the thought of food. I threw the bar in the river and shoved the wrapper in my backpack. I drank half a water bottle, suddenly desperate for that cleansing cold on my palate. I contemplated leaving, but I didn't. I certainly didn't want to continue after it, but to go back now would mean walking during dusk. I wouldn't be back to my car before dark. If there's one thing I was always told, it's that there is never a good enough reason to be walking through the woods at night. The predators came out at night. I cautiously got back on track, keeping my pace slow so as not to catch up to nothing. Because there was nothing there, right? I walked for another hour or two, hyper-aware now of every sound and movement. At one point, I thought I heard more words behind me. There was also a faint smell, not one of decay, but still like something I'd smelled before. I kept on moving. The spot I was looking for was only a little further, and I found myself hurrying despite my fear, ready to set up camp and hide myself away for the night. It seemed like the sun was setting before I knew it. By then, I had made it into the clearing I generally used as camp, which I'd finished setting up in no time. Where I was off the trail quite a bit. It required a fair amount of effort getting to being as it was through the thicket of non-trail, but I felt oddly safer, tucked into an innocuous part of the forest I was sure only I knew about. I'd stumbled upon it by accident a couple years ago, after getting briefly lost. I contemplated setting a fire like I usually would, which is probably frowned upon, I know, but I felt like it would draw too much attention. That feeling of being watching like tiny pin pricks along my skin had started up again. I forced myself to breathe as I sat in front of my tent and choked down a peanut butter sandwich for dinner. The full darkness of night soon prevailed. The stars shone brightly through the trees, and I lay down on a blanket to watch them for a while. It was then, as I managed to find a small semblance of peace, that a twig cracked in the distance. I frowned and sat up, peering into the darkness around me, though I couldn't see past where the clearing ended. I was just reaching for my flashlight when the wind blew again, my hair lifting with it, and there was that sickly sweet smell of decay. Panic started to set it. I hurriedly moved into my tent, zipping it up securely. I hugged my knees to my chest and listened, squeezing my eyes shut as the noises grew more frequent. Another broken branch, shuffling of leaves, ragged breathing. I found myself shaking my head, thinking that this couldn't be happening. Not now, not to me. Look, trail. The voice was just as grating as before. Wait, dark. It grew closer. I could hear the moment it stepped into the clearing, the sound of brush giving way to the whispering of grass. My mind was going 100 miles an hour, trying to piece things together. The smell, the limited words, the clop-clop of cloven feet. It hit me suddenly what it was. What it had to be. Goatman. I'd read about him plenty of times on No Sleep. I'd laughed those stories off. I certainly wasn't laughing now. As Goatman shuffled closer to my tent, he began circling it. There. Dark. Wait, he repeated, pausing his steps every now and then. I was praying he'd go away. Maybe he didn't know I was in here. Maybe he'd get bored. Dark. Ambush. Tent. What? Where had he heard that? Because that's what this was, right? He only had words he'd heard before. Who on this trail had said that? My panic continued to rise, though I didn't dare make a move. Twigs snapped suddenly, somewhere in the direction of a trail. My head snapped to it involuntarily, and I had a sickening image of Goatman doing the same thing, listening for more words. The footsteps that grew closer sounded like they were being made by something. Someone desperately trying to keep quiet but failing. Why do you need camo for fishing? I thought again, this time just a bit hysterically. Goatman happened to have stopped on the opposite side of the tent, which favored him by allowing him to remain unseen. Not that it wasn't almost pitch dark out there, save for the moon and stars. Goatman lingered for a second, my attention snapping between him and the bumbling from the other direction, before he ambled away into the night. There was a second where I stayed perfectly frozen before that survival instinct I mentioned finally kicked in. I scrambled to grab my wallet from my backpack, then shoved it in a pant pocket. Keys, check. Phone, check. Flashlight, it'll give me away if I use it, but it's heavy duty, good for swinging, check. Shoes tied, check. Deep breath. I paused to inhale deeply, check. I put my hand on the zipper and stopped to listen. They were probably just about at the edge of the trees. The opening of the tent wasn't facing towards them, but it wasn't facing away either. But Goatman had gone that way, so that was a no-go anyway. The steps stopped, and I knew they must be looking right at me. I took a second to decide how to approach my escape. I'd already decided that my tent belonged to the woods now, and my backpack would only slow me down. Do I hurtle out and book it? Or do I casually get out and then run? I placed my hand on the zipper. It was now or never. The sound of a zip seemed as loud as a gunshot. I slowly climbed out, making sure not to appear aware of the eyes on me. I gave a slow stretch, eyes steady ahead. I took a breath and pushed down all my fear and panic. Then I broke into a dead sprint. I heard one of the men shout, but I didn't hesitate as I ran towards the forest. The plan was to run straight and then cut right to get back onto the trail. I knew if I got on the trail that I could outrun them. I could hide if I needed once I was far enough away. They thundered after me, cursing loudly. I hit the layers of trees with a stumble, but my momentum kept me going. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me, the trees' black lines cutting through the gray. My arms got scratched as branches whipped past. I wanted to turn my head to see if they were close. I could make out the sound of their steps over mine. I wanted to see if I could make out any sign of the trail I was running parallel to, but I didn't dare do so for fear of tripping horror movie style. I fell anyway. 1 second I was upright, and the next I was falling, landing hard on my shoulder. My flashlight was lost to the dark forest floor. Dirt covered my hands as I scrambled to get to my feet again. I was too late. A hand closed around the back of my shirt, yanking me harshly back. A scream almost tore itself from my throat, but then a hand was over my mouth, another one winding around my waist. I thrashed and tried to kick out, digging my hands into his arm around me. He held steady, laughing between pants. Should have known you were a runner. His hand slid lower over my hip despite my efforts. Tears filled my eyes and spilled down my cheeks like traitors. His buddy showed up behind us, slowing his gait to a light jog. He was breathing far heavier than the one holding me. She is fast, ain't she? You know I love when they fight, though. The hand over my mouth loosened for a second as his other one moved to the button of my pants. Blind panic shot through me, and I bit down as hard as I could, warm copper filling my mouth. The owl grip going slack. I threw my entire weight forward, once again sent sprawling. The next seconds were a blur of hands grabbing at me, rocks digging into my hands as I struggled to get traction. I was sure for a moment that this was it. I was done for. I had thought Goatman would be my end. Not this, not like this. My hands touched metal just as my ankle was grabbed. I didn't hesitate, used the grip on me as leverage to twist around and swing. There was a crack as the flashlight connected with bone. The hand released me. The man it was attached to was yelling. I swung blindly once more, striking something soft this time. The hands reaching for me were gone. I no longer tried to run forward. Instead, I focused on getting to the path, cutting into the woods at a 90-degree angle. I was on all fours for a couple feet before I was finally vertical. My heart was pounding harder than ever. Tears and snot were running down my face. The taste of blood stained my tongue. I was more or less staggering through the brush, breathing heavily. Hide! My brain was yelling, hide, hide, you're making too much noise. So I hid. I made out a patch of ferns in the dark, dropped to my knees and crawled into it. I pressed my back to a tree, facing the trail. They wouldn't see me. I tried to calm my breathing, but couldn't stop the way it hitched on sobs. I could hear them once again trudging toward me, slowly this time. They were whispering harshly back and forth. You think she made it back on dash? SHHHH. You talking ain't gone help us. SHHHH. Goatman gurgled from next to me. I had to clap a hand over my mouth to stop from screaming. I slammed my eyes shut, trying to stop from sobbing. Chill. He sounded pleased with this new word. He was crouched next to me. I could feel his rotten breath on my face, could only imagine what he looked like next to me. Cloven feet and sideways pupils focused on me, watching, listening. Rough fingers were run gently over my hair, trailing over the side of my face. There was a moment where I was nothing but the personification of frozen. Runner. Fast. SHHHH. Did you hear that? Close. The men were close. What was a worse way to die? By their hands or Goatman's? Sounded like talking. Talking. Goatman mused next to me. Ambush. And then he was gone once more, heading back towards my tent. His steps weren't light, branches crunching under his feet as he went. Listen that way. Going back toward her tent. Must be. Come on. She may have a phone. And after Goatman they went. I sat there, dumbfounded that I was still alive. I sat there, breathing, amazed that I still was. Then I got to my feet, making my way to the trail as quietly as possible. The relief that washed over me when the sound of the stream reached me was bittersweet. I had miles to go before I was out of the woods, both figuratively and literally. I started running when my feet reached the beaten-down soil of the path. I didn't stop when the screaming started. I certainly didn't look back when it started to echo. I didn't stop till I hit the trailhead, dawn just beginning to bleed light through the canopy of trees. My feet ached, cramps had me clutching my sides, my muscles were screaming. I paused only to throw up, dry heaving long after my stomach was emptied. There was a brief, sinking moment of terror when I saw my car and their truck in the parking lot, the thought that they'd done something to it suddenly hitting me. They evidently didn't think I'd be making it out alive as my car started fine. My hands were shaking as they gripped the wheel. They were shaking the whole drive home and long after I made it there. I locked all my doors, pulled all the blinds, closed all the curtains. I showered and sobbed and brushed my teeth till my gums were red. I chased a sleeping pill with a bottle of water, then took another just for good measure. I slept and thankfully didn't dream. I wrote this all just now after waking up. This is just as much a warning as it's a way to get it off my mind, so I can hopefully push it all down. I finish with this. If you ever find yourself alone in the woods with monsters, pray that there's something worse out there. It may be the only way you survive. And if that something worse happens to be Goatman, don't you dare say a word. Because if you have, then I'm afraid it may be too late. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.